come let us adore him. Oh, come let us adore him.
Alright, today just marks the beginning of the Advent season. And this is a whole season dedicated to looking forward to Christmas. And then the word Advent simply means arrival, and it often means the arrival of someone important or someone of dignity. And in our case, Jesus. Advent is looking forward to the arrival of Jesus. And so Advent is a time of anticipation, like Carl and Elaine read in that reading this morning. It's a time of looking forward, of waiting for the Lord to come. But it's also a time of reflection on looking back on this past year and thinking about all of the different ways that God has blessed you and me. So Advent is this really, really special time when we get to really focus in on what Christmas really means. And like Jared said, some people kind of debate, I guess, is Easter more important or is Christmas more important? And the reality is you can't have one without the other. Because if we didn't have Easter, we wouldn't have Christmas. And if we didn't have Christmas, we wouldn't have Easter. So they're both, I agree with Jared, I think they're equally important. So this is an exciting time of year as we're looking forward to the anticipation and to the arrival of King Jesus. And I've always loved the Advent season. Of course, when I was little, what kid doesn't love Advent? Because they get to see Christmas presents piling up under the tree, and you get little Advent calendars with chocolates in them or stuff like that. But when I was little, our Advent calendar was basically a blank felt canvas. And on it, the top was blue and the bottom was brown to represent sky and ground. And there was a little stable on it. And every night around dinner time, we would read from a little book, and we would have, it would start out with like trees and bushes and flowers. And then later on, every day, we would add a new thing to our calendar until eventually, we got to like Mary and Joseph and an empty manger. And then on Christmas morning, we would wake up and we would get to put the little baby Jesus in the manger that had been waiting for him all season long. And I just loved this calendar. I loved watching it fill up because I knew every day that we put something on was one day closer to Christmas. And that is really what the Advent season is all about. It's about seeing that every single day we're getting one day closer to Christmas. And of course, when you're a kid, the most exciting part about Christmas is the presents and what's under the tree. And so that's what I was getting excited about. But Advent is really more about getting excited about what Christmas really means, the advent of Jesus. And our culture has learned this excitement as well. It seems like every single year, the countdown to Christmas starts just a little bit earlier. I remember, it was probably like the week before Halloween. I was driving down Holly Springs Road, and there were Christmas lights on like 3 or 4 houses. Like, it wasn't just one house, If it had been one house, I'd been like, all right, well, those people are just a little excited, or maybe they just leave them up all year round and just turn them on today or whatever. But it was like 3 or 4 houses before Halloween, like the middle of October, people were already decorating for Christmas. And I think it was the same if you walk into stores, you'll see Halloween stuff and Christmas stuff right next to each other. Like, the countdown to Christmas starts early. Even in our post-Christian world, people get excited about Christmas. And I think, we can look at this as a good thing or a bad thing. People, like, well, they're getting excited about Christmas, but it's not the real meaning of Christmas. They're just getting excited for all the decorations. But the reality is, Christmas is a Christian holiday. And so it's a good thing that our culture gets excited about Christmas. And that is a great opportunity to talk to someone, say like, hey, I noticed you have some Christmas lights out. Do you know what those represent? Jesus is the light of the world. That's a great conversation starter right there. And so it's not just something anymore that is unique to Christians. But it's also something that's not new to Christianity. Like, Advent wasn't invented in the last 100 years. Advent has been going on since the creation of the world. I mean, it goes all the way back to the fall of humanity. In Genesis, right after we have Adam and Eve, who have just allowed sin to enter the world. They opened the door for sin to enter the world. And you think that this moment should be full of despair, and you think that there should be no joy or hope found in this moment. But even in this darkest moment, the moment where all darkness entered the world, God still brings hope, and he plants the seeds of anticipation. He plants the seeds of Advent, the arrival of Jesus. Because in Genesis 3:15, in the middle of the curse, as he's cursing humanity and the serpent, he says to the serpent, "Cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel." And so from the very beginning, we have God declaring that one day Jesus is going to come. Because he's saying, the woman's offspring is going to crush your head. And that is the beginning, the very first prophecy we have about Jesus coming. And so Advent is nothing new. In fact, it is this idea of waiting goes all throughout the Old Testament. If you fast forward a little bit to the time of Abraham, again, the world is dark and there's not a lot of hope. And then God looks down on this world full of people who don't deserve a Savior, who don't deserve hope. He looks down on this world and he sees Abraham. And it's not really clear why he chooses Abraham. You know, some people joke that, well, he just opened up the phone book and chose the first name that showed up. But I don't really think that's why. But for some reason, God looked down and he saw Abraham. And he said that through Abraham, I am going to bless the nations. And so now this prophecy about one day someone who's going to strike the head of the serpent gets a little bit more specific. And then we fast forward again to Isaiah, and we read about the suffering servant and all the other prophets. You know, we read that one day the virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and that son's name will be Emmanuel, which means God with us. And so all through the Old Testament, there's just these seeds of anticipation and waiting that are planted. And these seeds of anticipation give the Israelites hope. And that's what this first candle represents. Each one of these candles represented on this Advent calendar represents something. And this first candle represents hope. Because Advent is a season of hope. Because this looking forward and this anticipation that one day God was going to send someone to save the Israelites. It stayed with them throughout their slavery in Egypt. It stayed with them throughout their exile to Assyria and Babylon, and through their horrible kings and their good kings. All throughout, you have these prophecies that are giving the Israelites hope, something to look forward to. And then finally, we get to the very first chapter of the New Testament. And there's a lot writing on this first chapter of Matthew. Because between the pages of Matthew and Malachi, there are 400 years of silence. 400 years where there were no prophets, no miracles, no communication between God and the Israelites other than through the temple and the synagogue. 400 years of silence. And so there's a lot writing on this first chapter because this is when God is going to break the silence. And so with all of this anticipation and all of this buildup, and then finally the calm before the storm almost of the 400 years, you would think that God would choose something really exciting or really, theologically profound as the first words to break the silence. But you know what he starts out with in Matthew 1:1? Matthew simply writes, "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham." Now, I don't know about you, but I'm not really a fan of genealogies. Like, I don't just read them in my spare time. And you would think, like, there is so much anticipation and importance riding on this first chapter of the New Testament. So with so much importance riding on it, why would God choose to have this first chapter be a list of names? I mean, literally it starts out, Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar, Perez the father of Hezron. I mean, and it just goes on like that. Like, why is that what God chooses to be the first communication to his people? And of course, it's always dangerous to ask why God would choose to do anything, because, he's God. He can do whatever he wants. He doesn't need to follow our human rules of what he should and should not do. So I don't want to get into the questions of why. But I do think that if we study who these people are that God chooses to put in this genealogy, we can learn a lot. And so the first thing that this genealogy teaches us, or does for us, is it connects the dots of the Old Testament. And so on the screen, we're going to have a picture. But as you can see, the picture is pretty incomplete. And now if you're mentally, you're going to go ahead and fill out that line and see that it's an adorable puppy. But the reality is that's us filling in the lines by ourselves. And this picture is incomplete because as you can tell that it's a puppy or a dog, I don't know, but it's not full. And so the first thing that this genealogy does for us is it connects the dots. Like, what this picture needs is it needs someone to go through and to connect each dot to the next one, to draw a line so that we get the full and complete picture. Can you put it back on this? Thanks. So once you connect all of the dots, then you'll have the full picture. And so this picture, as it is right now, represents the Old Testament. Because the Old Testament, until we get to the New Testament, the Old Testament can feel like just a bunch of stories that maybe have something to do with one another because, the people are all related and it's grandparents of so-and-so. But the reality is it doesn't really feel connected. And so what the genealogy does for us as we read these names of people, we see that all of these people are connected as the ancestors of Jesus. And so we see that from the very beginning, God has been weaving this great story of his love for people, for humanity. And biblical scholars often refer to the biblical narrative. And that's just this idea that everything in this book right here, from Genesis 1 to Revelation 22, is all just one big story. And it feels like a bunch of different stories. It feels like this dog that's not complete. But when you go through and you connect the dots, you see that it's one picture of God's love for humanity. And so that's the first thing that this genealogy does, is it just shows us that God had a plan all along. And he chose these people to be the ancestors of Jesus. And so these people are important and they're connected. And it's also a reminder that every story has a purpose. As you're reading through these people, we see some names that we recognize. We see Abraham and Isaac, and we see King David. Maybe some of us recognize Boaz, or, Jacob and Judah. So we see names that we recognize. And what we realize is that those stories of those people whose names and stories that we know, they had a purpose. And some of those stories are really hard to read. And some of us have stories this morning that are really hard to read. You know, some of us have stories that feel like they don't have a purpose. We feel like we've suffered things for no reason, or we've done things, and so now we're getting what we deserve. And we feel like our stories have no purpose. And these people in this list of names, they felt the same way, I'm sure. You know, they had things happen to them, they did things that maybe they felt like they didn't deserve. They definitely felt like they didn't deserve hope. But their story had a purpose, because everything in the story was leading up to the advent of Jesus. So that's the first thing that this genealogy tells us, is that our stories have a purpose. And so let's take a closer look at some of the people in this genealogy, because this is a really big deal to have your name listed as the ancestor of Jesus. I mean, there have been trillions of people in this world throughout time and history. And there are like 40 or something names listed. So what did these 40 people do to have their names listed in the ancestry of Jesus? And the reality is, these people did nothing. A lot of these people in this list are the last people you would expect to be in the genealogy of a Jewish Messiah, of the Savior of the world. I mean, we have Isaac. He was manipulated. He was lied to, first by his uncle Laban, and then later by his own son, Jacob. And then we have Jacob, who tricked his brother Esau out of his share of the inheritance. He was a liar. His name literally means trickster. And then we have Judah, who kept his daughter-in-law Tamar from getting what was really hers. He tried to keep her from getting a son. And so then Tamar turns around and manipulates him and tricks him into giving her two sons, the twins Perez and Zerah. And then skipping down further, we have Rahab. I mean, she was a prostitute and a Moabite. And that's the last person you would expect to be in this list. The Moabites were the enemies of the Jews. And then we also have Ruth, another Moabite who really did nothing to deserve to be in this list of people. And then there's Bathsheba, who wasn't even mentioned by name, but only as Uriah's wife, as if to remind the reader of everything that happened when David saw Bathsheba bathing on the roof and sent for her to come and had a child with her while her husband was away at war. It's as if to remind the reader of that story. Mothers were not often mentioned in genealogies. So the author Matthew could have very easily left these women out. But he chose to put them in as if to remind the reader that these are real stories of real people. And these stories, they're complicated, convoluted stories, had a purpose, and that purpose was to bring hope to a hopeless world. And then we have these kings of Israel. We have Rehoboam and Abijah and Ahaz and Manasseh, some of the worst kings in Israelite history. I mean, these people killed prophets of the Lord. They set up idols to be worshipped. Some of them, Manasseh especially, even sent their own sons to be sacrificed for Moabite gods. I mean, these were really bad people, and yet they're in the genealogy of Jesus. And eventually those people led their kingdoms into such dismay and disorder that the kingdoms were exiled. And yet here they are in the genealogy. And so if you haven't really picked up on it, this list is not a list of the superheroes of the faith. This isn't a Hebrew 11 Hall of Fame thing that we're talking about here. This is a list of people with real problems who did nothing to deserve to be in this genealogy. And I mean, the reality is, God could have made this list full of perfect people. I mean, in his sovereignty, he could have looked down on Adam and Eve, and he could have created a bloodline of pure, innocent people, protected them from doing any harm, so that when Jesus came, he would have come from this long line of perfect people. But God didn't do that. He used some of the worst people in Jewish history to bring the best for humanity. And I think he did that to show that Jesus didn't come for perfect people. He came for both the oppressor and the victim, and for the sinners and the broken. And that's what makes this list so beautiful. Because it's from this brokenness that healing comes. And he transforms brokenness into something absolutely beautiful. And that's where the hope comes from. So if you have brokenness in your life right now, if there's someone that should be with you this Christmas season, and for whatever reason they're not, or if you're not sure how you're going to pay for Christmas, or you'll pay for Christmas but you'll go in debt for the rest of the year, or if you're not sure if you'll be able to survive all the hecticness that comes with the Christmas season, or even if you have brokenness that has nothing to do with Christmas, just know that God can transform brokenness into something beautiful. And so this week's theme for Advent is all about hope, the hope of Jesus. And so let this list of people who desperately needed hope be a reminder for you. And remember that every story has a purpose. Because the beautiful thing about the Bible and about God's story is that it's still being written. The last chapters of Revelation haven't happened yet. They're in the future. They're prophecies. And so we're living in the in-between. And God is still writing his story. He's still connecting the dots. And so your story, whatever it is, whatever it looks like, has a purpose. And so let that give you hope this morning. Because God isn't just letting you suffer. He isn't just letting these things happen to you for no reason. But he's letting them happen so that your story can be transformed into something beautiful. So that you can have hope, not only for yourselves, but so that you can give that hope to the people around you as well. And so, there are stories in this room that don't necessarily come from God. God doesn't send every calamity into your life. But God can still redeem those calamities. And there's a verse in the end of Genesis, in Genesis 50, after Joseph has been taken from his home, from his father, and sold into slavery. And he's given, he goes through prison, and then he rises through the ranks, and he becomes the second most powerful man in Egypt. And so finally he's meeting with his brothers, the ones who sold him into slavery. And he looks them right in the eyes, and he says, "You intended this for slavery, but God intended it for good." And so that's what this Advent season is all about. All of these people, some of them intended to be evil. They purposefully meant to be bad. But God turned it around and made it something good. And that's why I love Christmas so much. Because it's just a story of God transforming humanity. So as our hearts are filled with anticipation this Christmas season, as we're looking forward to Christmas morning, to being with family, and to, maybe opening presents or whatever it is we're looking forward to this Christmas season, let hope fill your soul as we wait for the day when we will no longer need hope, because everything that we've hoped for will be fulfilled. Because that day is coming. There is a day where hope will no longer be needed. Because what we're hoping for, what we're looking forward to, is the day when Jesus comes again. Because Advent has two meanings. The first is looking forward to Christmas, to looking forward to the first coming of Jesus. But the second meaning is looking forward to the second coming, to when Jesus will come again. And this time he will wipe out all fear, all pain, all sin. And we won't need hope anymore, because everything that we've hoped for will be fulfilled. And so we will no longer have any worries or pain or fear. And so that day is coming. But in the meantime, we can look to Jesus for our hope. And we can look to him to transform every situation. But the exciting thing about this hope that Jesus brings is that it's not just for us. And we can continue to let Jesus transform our brokenness. But we also have to let that transformation bleed out into our community and into the people around us and the people that we interact with every day. Because God gives us hope for ourselves, but there are also people that you come in contact with every single day that have no idea that Jesus can transform their situation. And so they're still living in despair. And they're still living as if there's nothing good that will ever come, as if this life is all there is. And we have something so exciting that we can't afford to be quiet about it. And so this Christmas season, as you're looking forward to Christmas Day and to everything that it means, keep an eye out for people who only think Christmas is about the gifts or about family or doing the right thing. All those things are good, but that's not the true meaning of Christmas. So keep an eye out for people who don't know the true meaning of Christmas, who don't know that Jesus came for them. And let them know that they can have the same hope that you have.
Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore